So today my guest, who is staying in the library up here, is an extraordinary woman. She's a writer of many books that have sold millions of copies, and she's a professor, former professor, and a journalist, and her name is Maria Hornbacher. And we had dinner last night, and she's asked me to be on her kind of podcast project that she's doing, traveling around the country. And I said, why don't we do both my podcast and yours at the same time? So I've given her warning that I'm coming in. Am I gonna get killed by your chihuahua?
No, my fierce guard chihuahua. Right?
Hello.
She is so excited to be in charge of things right now.
Wonderful. How was your first night in the library?
So dreamy.
Was it good?
All the books. I could have stayed up all night reading. It was great. It was wonderful.
Did you find a favorite?
I got Blue Highways out again. I haven't looked at Blue Highways in a while. And it's so pertinent to, what I'm doing right now. It's just, and William Lee Teetmoon was so far ahead of what everybody was talking about at that point. And I love that it has remained Hellozy. It has remained so much more relevant to me than on the road. I mean, so much more relevant than on the road.
And you are on the road right now.
I am indeed.
How long have you been on the road? I just showed your camper outside. I started there and I just decided to come up here.
The tramp scamp.
The tramp scamp.
So shameless. Telling my dad he's like, doesn't even get the reference, but also he's like, okay, all right. So I've been on the road 18 months, a little bit more.
Do you want to start your recording as well?
I would love to.
Yeah, do it.
Have me doing it. We can duelingly record.
Yeah.
So I actually am going to leave this off now. So I've been on the road 18 months, and it is a joy. It's a fucking nightmare, both. You know what I mean? Like how could it be just one thing?
Yeah.
So on the road 18 months and meandering around looking for, we've all gone to look for America.
Yeah.
I don't think the kids even remember that song, do they?
I do. Simon Garfunkel, right?
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. We were little when that came out. We were little. But yeah, so looking for America and starting on the left coast. I got questions.
You said the end of America in a way.
I am sort of, to me, it is the end of empire. I mean, like to me, it was a tiny, really brief empire, and did it badly, as empires tend to do. And I really feel like it's in fall and decline, and it's fine that it's doing that. It's not fine for everybody who's going through it, but the idea of America was much better than the execution.
My father used to say, every time I go to America, they tell me I'm decadent. And I take it as a great compliment, because great culture always comes out of decadence. When an empire is expanding, yeah, its concerns are, military might and, yes, conquering. But yes, once it's in decline, yeah, it needs to create culture in order to hang on to its sense of significance.
Exactly.
So like if you look at the Greeks and the Romans, their most interesting work was done in the end. So maybe that could be the silver lining.
I think, Leonard Cohen talks about that too. He always did better work when he was ending a relationship than beginning it. I think there's that moment of inspiration in newness, like new relationship energy.
Right.
Like, we're starting something. This is inspirational. This is hopeful again. But then, I think there's a ridiculous level of artistic generativity that can come out of wistfulness, regret, loss. I don't tend to work best there. I tend to work best at a remove, when I'm at a mental remove. And so looking at America from a certain level of remove, I've never felt belonging here, but I've never felt belonging anywhere else either. And so there's a sense of detachment that allows me to do my work the way I do it, which is not as invested as other people do work on America. It is a more sort of like, well, you did that, didn't you? You know what I mean? There's an element of detachment. I would never say objectivity. I think it's a crap concept, but there's a level of detachment that affords me enough emotional remove that I can look at it and be like, wow, you really are falling apart in a big dramatic way, aren't you? I'm sorry about that. You know what I mean? It's not the kindest perspective, but it's also not unkind. It's, I'd say, cleaner, than, oh, woe is America, America's dying. It's also like, well, America set itself up pretty well to collapse quickly, didn't it?
And what is the evidence you're seeing of that collapse?
Financial mostly, but also I'd say philosophical. I mean, there's this sort of, the whole concept around, make America great again. I'm like, which America was that? I mean, so the whole premise of the MAGA crap is so, I mean, it's premised on such a phantasmal idea of what America ever was, right? Like, so, it's talking about make America great again. For whom? When was that? What are you talking about? Like, why doesn't marriage last anymore? Well, women can have bank accounts now. They can afford to leave. And so there's this element of fantasy, of retrospective fantasy that people are celebrating a concept of an America that never was, couldn't possibly have been. It's built by slaves on stolen land. Like, so like just if you are a woo-woo person, if you take it and never give back, it will fuck you in the end, karmically. If you're not a woo-woo person, it's still economically set up to privilege one tiny, tiny fragment of the population. And that's fine for them, but that leaves everyone else resentful and struggling and striving and struggling and striving. And one fragment of that populace has broken off to idealize a fantasy because, Trump has done nothing better and more effectively than co-opt people who are fundamentally his minions and will go down for him. I mean, that's been the most amazing genius of his PR machine, is to co-opt white men who have no money and no power to believe in him and go down for him at no profit or benefit to themselves. I'm like, that's fucking brilliant. On the other hand, it doesn't do anything to mitigate rage on any front. And so, the decline I see is at a numeric level. People are dying quickly. Men are dying more quickly than women. White men are dying more quickly than they used to be. And they are the ones who are most celebrating an old America that will not return, never was in the first place. The rage is everywhere. And just the emotional fraught, the charge, I'd say the emotional charge that I see when I talk to people. It doesn't matter who they are, what they have, where they're from. There is this rage. There is this anger. There is this grief that I think a lot of that is disguising. And then just economically, no one can survive to live anymore. Not no one. The difficulty economically of just making it is so profound. And that's something.
And then you probably saw that in a very extreme way when you just went through Bombay Beach, right?
I did, and both edges, right? Like, and I see it in my own life, that the privilege that used to be afforded by education no longer is, which is fine. Fundamentally, the leveling out of economic deprivation is I want to say at a spiritual or philosophical level, at a Marxist level, let's say, if we're going to go to Dulcine's sort of perspective, there's a fairness to that. On the other hand, what it means is that people who are in a position to help other people are no longer in a position to help other people in the way they might once have been able to. Like, I can't afford to teach, right? So what I have to do to utilize what I know, what I have, my cultural capital, call it, is find a way to get that cultural capital to other people, essentially for free, so that they can access it. But that means that I have no means of living unless I go on the road. Right. So
how do you make a living on the road?
I edit people's books, right? I edit the books of people who don't write books. I write books for people under their name, so that they can have books come out, so that the publishing industry, which makes 90% of the profits, can continue to make bloated profits. No writers are making a living on their own writing. We make a living on writing books for other people who don't actually write. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's so many iterations removed from what we used to think of as literature. But then listen to that ridiculousness. We used to, what is this phantasmal literary America I'm talking about? This never existed either. Like, that never existed either. I'm as delusional as everybody else. And I think that's interesting. I think it is. There's a nostalgia for the era when I got a massive book deal to write about being a train wreck. Like, who fucking cares? I mean, who cares about that? But that money, of course, doesn't go ultimately to me. And maybe it helps the reader at some level, maybe. But ultimately, who it helps is Rupert Murdoch, who owns that company, right? Like, Rupert Murdoch just got richer on all the little white girls who bought that book, which, good for him, maybe. But also, did the white girls get well? No. Did that solve race in America? What about all the girls who weren't white, who have the same issue, who didn't have access to the book? What the hell happens there? Like, so what is this literary America where things used to be blah, blah? What the fuck am I talking about?
I'm gonna let Dulcinea just woke up. I'm gonna tell her that she can come in.
Good.
Hold on. We'll pause for 1 second. Okay, we're continuing our conversation.
Yeah, so that element of Bombay Beach. I mean, you know, obviously there are people there who have nothing materially. There's also, I have questions for you about what drew you to it. You know, really, I mean, the California-ness of it was so profound and pronounced. You know, when you're born in California, I know you're born in Thailand. When you're born in California, there's none of that Golden State allure, right? You grow up here and you're like, it's a fucking chicken again at 4 a.m. Like somewhere there's a chicken. Always. Doesn't matter where you are in California. There's a rooster at 4 a.m. And you're like, all right, this is California. I'm home, right? But there's also, you know, when you are from California originally, leaving it, you realize everybody else, again, that fantasy of what California is. People say things like, you don't look like a California girl. You look like you're from New York. I'm like, what does that even mean to you? Do you know how big California is? Do you know how many girls there are there? How many types of girl? Like, what are you even talking about? What is a California girl? What are you back in Beach Boys? And the Beach Boys were like retrogressive in their own way. You know what I mean? Like this idea of California, this idea of Go West, Young Man. I mean, I was listening to Liz Phair, Go West, Young Man song the other day. And I was like, how funny that she went back and pulled that out of wherever she pulled it out of, that concept. But California and Bombay Beach, everything about California feels like this surplus of weirdness. And I love it, and I find it super suspect. I do. So I'm curious about your thoughts on California and Bombay.
Well, Bombay, for me, what attracted me, it's similar to what I think it's analogous to what I said about Decadence before, is that it's an example of a place where everything that can go wrong did.
Yes.
And so, you know, if you look environmentally, economically, socially, it's a catastrophe on every level.
Right.
And as sad as that is, it also it presents an opportunity for to practice. It becomes a prefigurative space that we can, and it's also small enough that you can go in there and make an imprint in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And then there's another thing, which is that it's a place that, because everything went so awry, it's a place where that capitalism is not interested in. So you've got no billboards, no chain stores, no consumerism whatsoever. And so what the effect of that is that it's next to this kind of sadness and decrepitude, there's this refreshingness about it. Yeah. And my friend Mark Mack, who's a professor of architecture and a renowned architect who loves Bombay Beach, he said, he was living in Venice Beach for decades. Yeah. And when I showed him Bombay Beach, he was immediately enthralled and bought a place there. And he said, because in Venice Beach, you see the opposite. You see everyone concerned with health and environment, and everyone's going, there's a yoga studio on every corner, and there's health food stores, and then he said you very quickly notice that it's all so ego driven and consumerism driven. Yeah. It's all selling something, right? Yeah. So when you go to a place that is, the air is toxic, the water's toxic, there's no healthy food, there's no yoga studio, and yet you feel somehow refreshed when you're there. Right. And that's pointing at something, because when you go around the rest of America, it looks the same wherever you go. Yep. And there's this kind of leveling effect, which is what, this kind of these corporate systems, I think, create in order to ensure that people aren't creative, don't think outside of the box. Yes. And there's an irony that Bombay Beach is literally a box. It's this little, square, and it's a place where you could, and it's a square. All the places are rectangles. Yes. Everything is these boxes. It makes no sense, because you're in the open desert. You could have it be a very porous place. Yes. But instead it's delineated. Yes. Yes. Which is also kind of cool, because like is the opposite of like the sprawl you see in the other, you know, they say like eventually by 2050 or something, California, I mean, Los Angeles and San Francisco might become the same kind of sprawling metropolis just by all the suburbanization. Yeah. So I love that Bombay Beach is contained within this little square, like a European little village in a way. Yep. There's not the billboard anywhere. There's not, and then everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Right. Therefore, you can say, well, where do we pick up the pieces? And can we do so in a way that privileges, you know, the surreal and the creative and elevates artists who are like interpreting the landscape in interesting ways, and then can we use that to create an economy of like, you know, it's suddenly become a really fascinating place for people to come. Like people used to, most people in LA, including me 10 years ago, had never heard of Salton Sea or Bombay Beach. Now, like a couple of years ago, the LA Weekly did a top 50 places to visit in California, and like Bombay Beach was number 5.
I love it.
And you know, we have to be careful of that because we don't want to have its success destroy it. So the question becomes like, how do we preserve this outsiderness, this peculiarity, this surrealness, and preserve the soul of, and this is the thing that also every place that artists come to have to struggle with. We always have to see like, how do we, you know, you see those bumper stickers, keep Austin weird, or like, you know,
which didn't work out.
Yeah, none of it never works out. Look at the Soho in Manhattan. Yes. Look at Venice Beach. Venice Beach was a breeding ground for artists and amazing skateboarding culture and all this stuff. And then, you know, people say that sometimes they blame the artists. Which I think is totally wrong-headed when people say like the artists ruin the place. No, the artists are the ones who are creating it, making something wonderful, and then the next wave is the ones who ruin it. Right. The tech. Yeah. Hello.
Hello. 1970. Oh my goodness, Zeke. This is Zeke, by the way.
Zeke is a dangerous animal.
A little evil, very
Don't
slightly
try and
evil.
pet it.
Oh my goodness. She's actually, once she decides that it's your house, not hers, she's fine. But yes, this is Madam Zeke. She goes by.
How are you feeling?
Good. I slept like 12 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Good. It seems like it's maybe hopefully it's helped heal you.
Definitely.
Awesome. Yes, you do look refreshed. That's outstanding. Zeke would like you to know that this is now her, I guess, kitchen. Like this is, I've never met anyone so proprietary as this dog. I don't know, actually. I mean, we're very much alike in many ways. Not that way. Like no place I go feels like this is my spot. But Zeke is like, no. If I pee on enough cacti, you better believe this is my joint. I do want to kind of just quickly before we lose that thread, I want to say just about this sort of, is it the tech people who come in, or is it the fact that once a place starts having some artistic life and artistic vitality, and people start gathering there and going, this is a place that is generative. It's got something in the air, and no matter how toxic the air, is there something in the ground here that allows me to be creative and find and create an artistic community? Is it then the tech people who come in are like cheap land, or is it the people who come in and are like, we could make money here? Because that's what I see happening in every alternative artistic venue. So I was thinking about the Cocteau quote that's at the top of one of your films, where it's actually the LAFCO sort of docu, where you talk about he talks about once the materials of film are as affordable as paper and pencil, then film will become art. But isn't it sort of as the minute the materials become affordable, isn't that when another layer comes in and goes, we can profit on this? You know, isn't that when mainstream publishing comes in, or gallerists? Fucking gallerists, you know.
And real estate speculators. Yes, exactly. That's what's happening in Bombay Beach already. There's the first kind of house being flipped. And you know, part of me wants to like burn it down.
Tempting. Right. You know?
As soon as people try and capitalize on it is when, so like when you see the first parts of gentrification, artists come, great like foodies come, and you make a great cafe and a great restaurant, but then the people riding on the back of that who are trying to like, say like just see how they can make a quick buck. Sure. Then slowly the soul gets get sucked out of it. We saw it in San Francisco too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we blame the techies. I think we just blame the capitalists, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, that's exactly it. That's what I was thinking about. Is like when I was still born in San Francisco, moved back in the late 90s, and I'm like, literally, I was terrified of the hate as a little kid because it was the 70s and everyone indeed was high. And you're little and you're like, first of all, what was I doing wandering around the hate as a little kid? One never knows what those stories have as backstory. But as a little kid, I'm like, don't go too close to anything in the hate. And then I go back and I'm like, what do you mean we're going to party in the fucking hate? Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Do you know how dangerous it is? They're like, well, we're going to go to Ben and Jerry's, like, which was on the corner of Haight and Ashbury. I'm like, what have I just moved back into? So that's like at the height of the tech boom. And people could talk about, you know, it's the techies who made this happen. Literally, the techies were 22 fucking years old. They didn't know anything. They were getting paid in stock options. It was pre-crash. The Dow wasn't even at 9,000. And so, like, none of that had even happened yet. So who is it? And it isn't, it is capital and the chase for large-scale capital. Like, as an artist, I'd love to be able to make a fucking living on my work, right? Like, that would be super neat. However, for the majority of my career, my work, call it, you know, capital W, it's very, very pompous, has been making a great deal of money for someone else, which is, and I've been able to largely live on what fraction of it I earn. But now I'm starting to look at, like, even if I reclaim and go totally indie with my work and make the vast majority of the profit, how quickly does Substack and Patreon and all these things, how quickly do they make a larger and larger profit and become the new Big Five publishing? How quickly do they become MGM? How quickly do they become the recording studios? How quickly does that shift? And is there a possibility ever of retaining the point where the materials are as cheap as paper and pen, the art form retains the artness of it, we live in places that are affordable where we can do our work? Is that even a possibility in this country? And I really am not sure at this point. I'm not sure.
Well, maybe having an economy that's not going on full steam and always like growing, maybe that's a blessing in disguise. You know, maybe like slowing down a little and having to like be a little more conservative with our resources. You know, a lot of these things come from big booms, you know?
Yeah.
Where everyone's just like, I see it in real estate, right? Like here, like here in the desert, in the high desert where we are now in Joshua Tree, like suddenly prices tripling, 1,800 Airbnbs where it's just become a business for people. Sure. You know, I do Airbnb here, but I live here too.
Right.
And, you know, each place that, you know, I have a couple places in Bombay Beach, but those are all places that we've lived in, that we've like created with our own hands. And like, you know, it's not, again, it's the same pattern. Again, the speculators come in, drive up rent so that local people can no longer live there. And so I don't know, maybe just like a little bit of a break on that is not a bad idea. Maybe a little bit of decadence, as we said earlier, is okay.
So I mean, I'd love to hear you talk, either one of you, both of you, about how, I mean, like when most people think of the word decadence, they're thinking of an era. I love thinking about it as the moment when the era tips toward decline, like a decline of something, right? Decline of economic power. Decadence, most people think of that as almost indistinguishable from hedonism. I think of hedonism as the precursor to the tipping point, right? Like I think of hedonism as more. And that goes to the sort of the conversation you were talking to, was it Eric, about eros? And so the endless insatiability of desire for something. Anything, like, you know, and again, you usually think of eros as indistinguishable from sexuality, but all it is about is the longing, right? And so before we get to decadence, is decadence just, we're going down, let's go big? Is that what that is? Is like that, like artistically, creatively, personally, even economically? Is it just, you know, I see so many people, and there's an element of this that I appreciate, people being like, I have no money anyway, I may as well spend it all on amazing meals at restaurants. And I'm like, I'm not in a position to do that. But I see the sense in it, if not economically, then almost philosophically. I'm like, well, that's a good point. Are we going to be here in 50 years?
The book behind you, that hand.
Oh, yes.
Look,
yes.
The Art of Ruin.
Oh, yes.
And we had that as the poster for year 0 of the Biennale, and we called it The Art of Decay.
Yeah.
And obviously the decay and decadence have the same root.
Yeah.
And we had a philosophy conference where we asked philosophers, and one of the unexpected juxtapositions we do in Bombay Beach is bringing serious academic philosophers to speak inside like ruined buildings,
Right.
and rotting trailers.
Yeah.
And so we asked the philosophers from Oxford and Harvard to sit in a abandoned building and reflect on and give papers on why is decay compelling? Why are we attracted to ruins?
Yeah. Yes.
And
God, I'd like to hear that.
and I think that the idea that stayed with me from that was that time is usually linear, and there's only some times that we break out of that linearity and transcend it. And one of them, might be in a spiritual experience, a psychedelic experience, or when we visit ruins, because ruins represent like ruptured time.
Yes.
It's a future that didn't happen the way it was expected to.
Yeah.
And so there suddenly, again, there's like that freshness.
Yeah.
Ironically, because it's anything but fresh, it's decay and it's ruin. But we see there a break from the incessant linearity of time, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's also opportunity to make something new, because the ruin represents a plan that went wrong.
Right.
So obviously, like, the Colosseum in Rome is no longer doing Colosseum things, because we don't do that anymore.
Colosseum.
So now what happens? Like, sometimes you have decadence where just nothing happens and people just dwell on the past.
Right.
Or in a place like Bombay Beach, you have the possibility, because there doesn't have to be this like reverence for the past either.
Right.
That's the beauty of the United States, I think, is like everything is, in very ancient cultures, like in Italy, you have to like bow to that past, and there's no way you could ever do anything that compares. Like, I think I see this in the like faces of so many Romans. Like, if you're going around seeing the greatest art of the history of the world, and it's all has to be preserved for the tourists and everything. What can you do?
Right.
So instead, the idea that you could, have ruins, but that have like a playful interaction with them, and an irreverent interaction with them is great.
We're also not that old.
Exactly.
Like, our past is not that old.
Yeah.
It's quite recent.
I'm actually thinking about that in your sweater. You're wearing a 1970 sweater, and I'm thinking to myself as you're saying, is there a lack of the reverence for the past in the U.S., or is it just to scale, given how brief our past actually is? Like the reverence for retro, or bringing back 90s terrible pants, or one of the things. But like, is that not just a very, very collapsed version of reverence for the past, given America's incredible adolescence and its behavior as an adolescent, and always needing to do something new, but then casting back to like, what are you doing in 1970s? You weren't born in 1970.
I was not.
What was even happening in I wasn't born in 1970, and I've got 20 years on you. So like, what is going on that like I would love in my teenage years, that whatever the word is, what is it? I can't remember. Rhymes with Obad, but I can't remember. It's the nostalgia for things that never were, right? Like, or the nostalgia for experiences that we didn't have. I remember being, oh my God, the nostalgia I had as a 14-year-old. For what? Being 10? You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny because our friend Bella Freud we'll plug her. She's a brilliant fashion designer.
Yeah.
And she's the great-granddaughter of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
And the daughter of Lucian Freud.
Yeah.
And, speaking of heavy tradition and past, and she makes these brilliant kind of pithy sweaters and shirts that say something that is purposely meaningless, but evokes a mood. So 1970, if you ask her, like, why 1970? Yeah. Just because it's just great. It's just and there's no like deep reason for it.
Yeah, exactly.
She has one that says like Ginsberg is God, and then on the back it says Godard is dog.
Oh my God. Godard.
So yeah, there is a little nostalgia for that wonderful like 60s, 70s, pop art, new wave films, and and beat poetry, obviously. Like
there for sure is now, but like when I was in my most nostalgic era of my early adolescence, which continues to be random to me, it was sock hops. It was like the 50s. Like we were idealizing, like again, that super highly gendered, these are your roles, this is how this goes. That post-war boomer sort of era of like, you know, the 50s, which are the precursor, like rumblings of communist sort of repression and wars here and there and everything like that. But when you're in a pop culture world where this much of the culture is in your awareness and it's all about colors and fashions and all these things, and the rumblings can go on, you know, unabated because you're paying attention to whether your socks match. So like all this is happening, but at the same time, there is this narrative emerging at that moment of this is a life in America. This is like, that was the height of American sort of economic power and American ideas of what a family was, and this is what American life looks like, and this is success and all these things, none of which have borne out, like the Colosseum, like none of that, not marriage, not households, not economies, not the way children were going to be raised, not the way the culture was going to go, none of that bore out. We are literally living in like the Colosseum of America, where like, well, that didn't go according to plan. And I'm super curious now, like, what do we do with it? Whether as a philosopher or as an artist, one, you know, can occupy both roles, but like, what do we do with the idea of an American past and an American future? Because like in California, one of the things that amuses me, has always amused me and sort of distressed me, is the memorylessness of California. It's the newest one, right? Like it's the newest America. And it never did get a hang of learning from its past. And so like Bombay Beach literally to me looks like Petaluma in the 90s, looks like Berkeley in the 70s. It all looks the same weird. It's the same oppressive almost weirdness of like, how many times can we innovate by not learning from what we already did? It's like everybody says to me, I want to write a memoir, I have a story to tell. And I'm like, everybody has a story to tell. What's different about yours? Like, can we make anything new? Can we do weird in any new way? Can we make an economy where things are functionally moving toward a sustainable artistic community? Or are we just going to keep doing the same weird and breaking it over and over? I'm just wondering.
what do you think?
Well, I think that that the internet flattened a lot of things. And so the ability to pull from every single different time period and have references from everything, I think does make it more difficult to make anything new at this juncture. And I think that, can you make anything new? I don't know, but it might strike someone at some moment as new. And that may be enough to create meaning. Is it new in the grand scheme of things? I don't know.
And Cocteau used to say that originality was the most overrated.
Oh yeah, and I think that's true.
Overrated ethos. That, you know, just do something meaningful that reflects what it is to be human at a particular time. People are very concerned with doing something new,
right?
But maybe new and shiny and everything is part of the same problem. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I feel that way with most of the things that I see. And, you know, I'm 30. Like, I haven't seen that much, but I still am kind of unenthused by most work that I see. But then once in a while, I see something. And maybe it's not new, but it's good enough that it enthralls me. And it's done something exciting, and there is something to be said, I think, of the moment and the context, because the context is always changing of the world. And so something that might not have been new 5 years ago could maybe be new because there's something else going on that it's talking to. And I think, I mean, I don't know about the aesthetics of Bombay Beach being new. They're probably not new. But there's something about the set of relations happening in Bombay Beach that seems to be unlike anything that I've ever seen. And again, I haven't traveled like extensively through small communities in America or the world, but for me, it's in a very sort of Joseph Beuys, like social sculpture, relational aesthetics of the 90s, like that is the art of Bombay Beach. It's not about the objects or the murals or like any of that. That's all kind of ancillary. It's like about the way that people are relating to each other in Bombay Beach that I think is the most fascinating part about it. And the aesthetics are neither here nor there. It's like fine. It's kind of like trash art.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Like, and Slab City's been doing that for much longer than Bombay Beach. So yeah, and that and to experience that, it takes time. You have to really sort of be there for a little while to feel that. And I've tried to explain this to so many people, and because a lot of my friends are like, what are you doing, like, out in this weird town? Like, the aesthetics is not very exciting to them. Like, and they're all artists, and they're like, what is it about here? And I try and explain it to them, and it's like a durational experiment that I do think is pretty
fresh.
Unusual.
Yes.
It's certainly unusual, and also certainly in a long lineage of avant-garde, strange art happenings outside of the mainstream. So it's not like completely cut off. It's in a lineage. But for right now, it's pretty interesting.
So that element of it is absolutely fascinating. And that's what I'm sort of most curious about is you guys, both of you, in your own ways, your draw to be in a space where exactly, I mean, what you're talking about is a very dialectical sort of way of looking at what's happening there. But also happening, the present tense verb of it, is really what I'm curious about what's going on in Bombay, is because like the thing that I started thinking about yesterday while I was there and meandering around was thinking about like, what is the generative moment here that creates the desire to continue it? Like what creates the desire to keep that ongoing experiment going? What does it bring to the people who come there? And is it self-contained, or is the art trying to go outward? Like that's, I think, another element. And is the art beyond trash art, beyond the object, beyond the art objects, which wonderful book, if you guys haven't read it, Jeanette Winterston's Art Objects, which can be read as art objects either way. And she plays on that a lot. Wonderful book. Old, but really freaking good. So take a look at that. But beyond the art objects there, the artfulness of being is what clearly is keeping something super alive and vital there. And so I'm curious about what draws you back to it. What do you want to make when you're there? Whether it's object or product or relationship, like what's the spark that keeps popping for you guys there that's different from somewhere else? That's different than Slab City, for example.
Yeah, or the other all too obvious comparison, which we're always trying to avoid, but I think is worth mentioning, is Burning Man. Because when that started in the 90s, it was this extremely like fresh, radical, anarchist, Mad Maxy kind of, you know, experimented mixing community, nomadism, and art making, and hedonism, and destruction, and fire, and all of these amazing kind of juxtapositions. And I think one of the things that inspired me in Bombay Beach was both to like the lineage of that, but also the really important differences, which is that Burning Man is purposely a totally blank canvas. Yeah, it's like this kind of the metaphor is the mandala. Yeah. So that you create this mandalic, city that just appears, and then a week, after the week, it just disappears. Yeah. And there's a beauty to that. Yeah. But it also can lend itself to the ephemerality could also lend itself to like superficiality maybe, or lack of a need for a deeper engagement with real life. Right. And right? And so a lot of people, a lot of people who've never been to Burning Man have a terrible view of it as this kind of like, just, only people who can afford to fuck off in the desert for a week and just have a hedonistic party, and really maybe it's like this kind of Dionysian ritual that actually helps sustain people the rest of the year around in the capitalist system. And so I think that in Bombay Beach, it's one of the amazing things about it is that there's 300 people who live there year round. We spend, as Dulcinea, alluded to, like several months a year there. Yep. And the art is one mode of engagement, but also, gardening and architecture and just building weird things. Yeah. Like you stayed in the place with the giant egg on top. I loved
the egg.
One of the mottos.
The cow across the street too. Like I was very attached to the cow on the roof.
The cow is amazing.
Delighted.
So it's very unusual to be able to play with real estate. I called it surreal estate.
Oh God, I love that.
Yeah, I was so proud of that I bought surrealestate.com and couldn't believe it was available. But then I realized that the only reason it was available is that I'd accidentally put 3 R's in it. And then when I tried to really buy surreal estate, it was like owned by someone and for sale for like $20,000 or something.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
So,
the tragedies of typography.
Which is how Google started, because Google is spelled wrong. Google, the number is Googol. Not.
Oh God.
Yeah, so that's why.
That's Google.
No, Googol is how you spell a Google, the number. Google. Yeah, just GOL at the end.
Those fuckers.
So they bought it and spelled it wrong, and that's why it was available. And
that's amazing. Yeah. I love that.
So maybe I need to launch surrealestate.com with the 3 R's.
You maybe should, because that's extra surreal in its own right. But I'm sort of curious about like the question to me of happening and what is going on, whether it is, there's the materiality beyond art objects. There's the materiality of, we are here building a community that, I mean, Burning Man to me is a wild, rampant, raging cliche. Not because it is, but because that's what my head has done with it. And so
have you been?
No, of course not. What the hell am I talking about? I'm acting like I know what I'm talking about. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But what I know of it is, as a Californian who grew up here going, every little frat boy in town just went to Burning Man. Let's not go to Burning Man. Not because it's not valuable, but because it became co-opted, like everything else, right? By people who wanted an experience. And so every little boy from fucking Appleton, Wisconsin gets in his BMW and goes to Burning Man because he's like, drugs and sex. And like, you can get that downtown. Like, we have plenty of both here. But there is this identity, this desire to merge identities with that which is other, that which is unknown, especially for people from parts of America that think California is the epitome of innovation. And I'm like, yes, and it's also as reductive and as repetitive and as cliched as any other place. There is the cliche of California. There's the cliche of Northern and Southern California. There's the cliche of Burning Man. So my question is, like you said, the internet flattens things, has flattened things. I think it has also sped up the flattening that naturally takes place from event to cliche. You know, from Burning Man being a vital moment to being a cliche that I'm not even going to go to because all it was frat boys. Which isn't even true.
Well, yeah, so also the problem with Burning Man is that it's been over-imaged.
Right.
So like everyone has an opinion of Burning Man without having gone.
Right.
For a long time, they didn't allow photos.
Yeah.
I wish that unless you like registered your camera and you were like a proper and then they had to see the photos before they were released. Yeah, that was genius.
Yeah.
Like it's just so hard to do now with phones.
Yeah.
But if we could like make people check their phones at the door in Bombay Beach, that would obviously probably go a long way towards
that'd be amazing.
Like not having it become banalized and flattened as quickly as it risks to. Like, how do you keep it from doing that? You have to always be reinventing. I don't know.
Or at least reinterpreting, because that goes back to your, like, is it new or is it different, or catching us at enough of a moment that it is a moment of being in thrall? Mm-hmm. Like, is there a moment, whether it's Burning Man or anything that is much newer, or is it just about the moment of meaning? Like, meaning has been made. This moment of thrall has taken place. And that, I think, is a much more interesting way of looking at whether art is of value to any individual consumer or experiencer of art. It's much more interesting to know, like, there's a lot of, somebody sent me a beautiful reading that this guy was doing of his terrible poem, but the poem was so powerful and his reading was so beautiful that I'm like, this caught me. I hate the last line, but again, that's the thing of, like, it doesn't matter what I'm reading, I'm still going to have my writer brain on. That moment of being in thrall absolutely took place. That moment of being, is it new? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Because I'm not necessarily, as an art consumer, desiring constant newness. Novelty isn't all that to me. What's exciting is exactly that word you used, enthralled. That's what really captures me these days, is has it caught me in a new way? And that's a subjective, that's me imparting the meaning to the art, much more than the art imparting meaning. So as an artist then, what's beholden upon any of us in creating? Do I have to be constantly new? No. But I'd better be thinking much more carefully about who's encountering my work, and are they going to get that moment of meaning which they so much more desperately need than we did, any of us even 15 years ago. So I have questions about, like, how do you guys as creators attend to that need in your reader, in your viewer? Like, how do you imagine the consumer of your work? I'm curious about that. Do you?
With film, it's a little trickier. It's a little trickier because of the distribution,
Yes.
Platforms and manners. I mean, I think the closest I've ever gotten, or like the idea that is still in development, but I make movies for high people, and so if I can get them high, they will receive it. This sounds ridiculous, but it's true. They will like understand the work in a better way.
Interesting.
And so
Does it matter high on what?
No, I mean, drunk is not really the vibe. But,
It's not the vibe. Drunk is not a vibe.
I mean, there's something about that sounds like a kind of silly thing to say, but they're like my work, whether it's like the lecture that I do in Bombay Beach, or my films, are always breaking with traditional forms. And so there's something about being in an elevated state that makes people more available to that, to receiving it, instead of kind of analyzing it from like a place of I don't understand this or something like that. It's like, no, just experience it. Don't think too much, don't think too deeply about it. And so that's part of the reason why I say that. I mean, you can certainly watch them not and have an experience. But so with films, it's like me and my production company partnered with a cannabis company to do a screening, and that was like maybe the closest I've gotten to kind of getting the audience in the state of mind that I so desire, versus sending a link and just people watching it on a laptop, like in any given. So film is like tricky in that sense. I'm a control freak, and I want to be like, sit in this room that I've like AV tested, and you know, if you can be high, that's great, but if not, at least make sure the volume is loud enough.
That's awesome.
Make sure the volume is high if you can't be high.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, please, dear God. So, and then with writing, I feel differently about that. The writing can sort of arrive as it is, but I think I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah,
that's something that I'm in process. But I think it's I think you have to set the scene as much as you can. Yeah. And so, but again, I'm a control freak, so I want to like really, as much that I can control when you receive the work is ideal for me.
Oh, that's painful. I think about that, and I'm like, I go back to what you said earlier about like so much is imparted by context. I think like the problem with having been alive and not died all this time and been writing all this time is that I look back on work I wrote 25 years ago and go, that has not changed. Everything around it has changed, and so the work has changed. The experience of the work, for no one who encounters that work encounters what I intended when I wrote it, and the need to let go of that is absolute. Like, I have no control over the experience that someone has of a book I wrote 25 years ago. How would I control for that? Yeah. How can you control for someone who encounters your work in 40 years? Right? Yeah. Control freak that you are, which I appreciate and understand. Yeah. It will be the hardest thing any of us has ever done if we are in any way artistically controlling. And you're like, the perfect conditions for this piece are over. They just happened. They're gone. That's where they went. And it's left, right? It's the conditions have left the room. So I think that's worth noting about the conditions, even like when Bombay and Sultan were devised, like when they imagined that, what if there was no way to retroactively go, let's reverse engineer this and see how this looks ecologically in 40 years.
So I'd love to switch gears a tiny bit since you're talking about your work 25 years ago. One of the things that I could use this as maybe a elegant way to transition. There was our friend James Oster, who's a great artist and one of the wittiest and most interesting people making work in Bombay Beach. He made the giant Monopoly board, which was and the Opera House. So he's always commenting on kind of the things people don't want to be talking about, like the real estate.
Yeah.
So he said that the thing that Bombay Beach has, if he had to define it, it would be a place where the rich and poor come together, and the only thing that they have in common is mental health issues.
Oh, interesting. Right. See also the internet.
See also the internet. No, so I was wondering if I could ask you about your relationship to mental health and how, because you've written about it explicitly, and how you see your personal journey inform your work, both as a journalist and as a writer.
Ooh, that's a good question. I do need a cigarette before I tackle that one. So if you're going to continue, I will be out there smoking.
Let's go out and smoke. Let's just change the scene.
Oh my God, this
you can smoke and talk.
None of y'all are supposed to be having cigarettes.
Let's go out this side.
All right. I'm gonna get a little water in my cup. Does anybody? I don't know what to offer you. It's your house.
No, I'm okay.
So helpless to be helpful in someone else's house, and my grandmother, my tiny old Oma, is rolling in her grave. She was like 4'8" by the time she died, and I worry about that.
What, shrinking?
Well, I've already shrunk, and I've shrunk more than I should have at my age. I topped out at about 5'2", and I'm down to just over 5 feet now, and I'm like, that's a rate of change that concerns me, because I've got quite a lot of time left on this planet to get even lower to the ground. Okay, so the thing about mental health, I mean, like, I so loved listening to your comments on journey, on the idea of a mental health journey. And I so also want to preface this by saying that one of the best things, again, about living long enough is that you find out how fucking wrong you were about everything. And it's such a relief sometimes. You know what I mean? You're just like, oh, phew, I can just be a schmuck like everybody else now. I don't have to be right. I don't have to be good. I don't have to be smart. I can just fuck it up and then fix it later. And that's such a fucking relaxing idea. So what I would say is that a lot of years ago, I would have said I was a real true believer in psychiatry, capital P. And now I think of it like enough time has gone by and there's been enough arc of change that I've started to think of it as the psychiatric industrial complex. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value, right? Like that doesn't mean, but I feel like so much of what has happened in the last, 40 years at least, is psychiatry has tried to frame itself as a hard science. It's not. And one of the things that struck me in what you were saying is also immediately after mentioning your mental health journey, you were talking about psoriasis, and you immediately said, Western medicine has no explanation for this, and it's like very frustrating because blah, 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 and then went back to psychiatry as if it does have an explanation, as if it is Western medicine, as if it is even valid as a science. It's not. Again, it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And you said, the DSM for good or ill, if you buy into it, if you don't. The DSM to me is, just historically is a ridiculous document. And now it is functionally, a means of insurance companies validating or not validating that they will or will not pay for your services, which is fine if you are looking at everything from a capitalist model, which is that insurance companies have to make money, doctors have to make money, hospitals have to make money. And so we need to say you have something. And I'm like, that makes you the profit model, not the individual, not the human being, not even the mind, right? Certainly not the mind. And so like what eventually happened, at a very simple level, writing about mental health hinges on the belief that things can change, right? Like it hinges on the belief that addiction can be paused, cessation can happen with addiction. It hinges on the belief that there is a before and an after in the mental health journey, right? Like the mental health journey implies a destination. It really does, in a way that journey as a word does not. Mental health journey arrives at something. And unfortunately for me, or fortunately, the arriving was at the beginning. It's more of an odyssey than a journey, right? Like I circled all the way back to, what if I'm just a pain? What if I'm just a pain in the ass? What if I'm smart and that's a horrible curse? Like, because I meet you and I'm like, oh, honey, you're just fucking brilliant. And I'm super sorry, but there isn't a name or a cure. And that's going to be uncomfortable for you. You know what I mean? That's going to be really fucking uncomfortable. And as you get older, you'll get more and more disinclined to listen to people tell you it's a problem. And you'll just be like, you know, honey, the problem is you. Like, if you can't keep up, fuck off. And that is also a relief. But it's not a pathology. And so, like, have I got a taxonomy in my head of what I have? You know, I listen, everybody I date, every dude I date says, oh, I'm sorry, I interrupt you all the time. I have OCD, I have ADHD. I'm like, you're an asshole, is what you are, is you're an asshole and you interrupt women. So what if you just shut up for 20 minutes and ask me a question and let me answer? And they say, well, no, I have ADHD. And I'm like, then get off the fucking phone. Go talk to somebody who gives a fuck. And that's not me. And so, like, that's a very long way of getting to the journey that I have taken has led me through what looked to be a very comforting series of answers. There was a name, right? In a Hegelian sense, when I was given a name for what I had.
What was the name?
Bipolar. But then they were like, probably not bipolar. And I'm like, okay, so, but I thought you said it was a textbook case of bipolar, right? And they're like, well, yes, but also you haven't had one of those little troubling episodes since 2007. And I'm like, so do I not have bipolar anymore? They're like, probably you never did. And I'm like, that is a post hoc ergo propter hoc argument. If this, then this, because I said this. That's basically in Latin, post hoc ergo propter hoc, because I said so. And I'm like, as hard sciences go, that's super sketchy. You know, if I had it, and if also, you know, just take it through really super straightforward logic. If I had bipolar, and if bipolar is chronic and permanent, and if I no longer have manic or depressive episodes, then I never had bipolar in the first place. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? Like, it can't have been because it wasn't. And so, like, you know, that's what I mean. It's like, so, okay. And then, so basically what happened is, at a narrative level, I was a troubling little kid. And I got to say, I'm not sure if it was I was troubled or other people were troubled by me. I would actually submit to you that the latter is more the case than the former. And I was born at a time when... I was born in the era of Girl Interrupted, and there were so many ways for girls and then women to be explained to that they were a problem and that their problems that they had were them and that the problem was them. And if we would just submit to care, if everyone would just be allowed to care for us, and all this caring came in the form of locked wards and institutions and medical care for things that are not in any way organically proven to be illnesses. Some of them are, right? Some are, but we have so little hard scientific data to show which is which, right? Like, is PTSD an organic illness? Is schizophrenia an organic illness? Is bipolar an organic illness? Well, is heroin addiction an organic illness? Is alcoholism an organic illness? Are eating disorders an organic illness? It really depends on who's making money, actually. It depends on who's making money off of the people who are suffering. And that concerns me because as a model of humanity, to profit on suffering people and their loved ones, right? To profit on the partners, the families who are so caring, that absolutely, that inhumanizes the object of care. The object of care then becomes a static point, and we all love this person so much we will care for them until they are comatose, right? And so, like, fast forward from I'm troubling other people, and I don't doubt that I'm a pain, and you know, that's where my origin is what if I'm just a pain? I was troubling people, and my way of being in the world was a problem for people. And was it a problem for me? I don't recall having been terrifically miserable until I started interacting with people who were like, you're a lot. And I'm like, who asked you? Well, it turns out you have to go to school. And I didn't do well in school because they made me hold still. And so now I tell people that and they're like, well, you had ADHD. And I'm like, what if I was just a little boy and needed to run around the block every 10 minutes? Why did I get pathologized for being a little kid who was raised in the 70s in Berkeley and literally allowed to come and go? And if I didn't die, they were one ahead that afternoon. You know what I mean? Like, what if era and context defines what was and wasn't odd? Because it wasn't until we moved to a suburb in Minnesota and I wasn't doing girl right that I was suddenly ill. And I'm like, but why do I have to wear a dress? I don't know why I have to wear a dress. Why am I getting detention for not crossing my legs? Why would I cross my legs? I'm behind a desk. You know, so like if you question the premise, well, then you're ill, right? Like you're just oppositional defiant disorder. There's a new one for that. I'm like, what if it's just a little fucking kid who is testing the boundaries of the existence that he has, she has, they have, right? Like, so now I'm going, it's, again, this is as contextually bound as that was, because now in the post-talk era, I'm going, what if I was just an odd kid? We have those, you know, we have strange children. Because as a strange adult, I have the agency to not be around people who find me to be a lot and to be around the people who don't find me to be a lot. I have the agency to not be partnered because I don't like being partnered. I have the agency to live alone because I do like living alone. And if a psychiatrist wants to go, well, you should be able to be partnered, I'm going, why? Right? Like, why would I need to be? What if we just have odd people? Like where I come from, odd people are more normal than not. And so,
hold on, Mike.
Yeah. And so like the mental health journey piece of this is there was a system into which I was entered and it felt comforting, right? Like I love being locked up. When you're locked up, they feed you a couple times a day, and it's always hospital food, and it's always the same. Like I think about Warhol's comment, you know, the more you look at the same exact thing, the better and emptier you feel. And so as a child, right, like my brain felt big. Was I distressed by my big brain? Not particularly, but it felt big. I don't mean big like powerful. I mean like it felt vast. Existence felt vast. I was also an only child with no supervision. So the world probably did feel vast, right? Because that's, again, contextually driven by, I had brilliant parents and they were off doing whatever they were doing. And that doesn't mean they weren't kind and amazing. They were. And the library was endless. And so I actually got everything I really needed, which was the library, right? And so then you change contexts and they're neglectful and the child is out of control and the child does not know gender roles and the child will not sit still through class and the child is this and that and the other thing. And all this care comes in. And they started locking me up. And I'm like, well, first it was eating disorders, right? Did I have an eating disorder? For sure. Is that an organic illness? There's zero evidence that it's an organic illness.
What do you mean by organic illness?
Biologically driven. So like, is there an eating disorder gene? Absolutely the fuck not. And I will absolutely go head to head with Tom Insel, the head of the NIMH on that. He and I have very different opinions. And we also have very different agendas. Right? Like I like Tom Insel, who was the head of the National Institutes of Mental Health for many years. He's now in private. He now works for Google. He's brilliant. And we completely disagree on a number of things like the origins. And he's a neuroscientist. And he cannot, to this day, show me the data that suggests eating disorders are biologically driven. But he's committed to the idea that they are. And I'm committed to the idea that they aren't because I had one and now I don't. And nothing biologically changed. And that people would say, well, that's very unusual. It's not unusual. It's actually much more common because the data they collect about eating disorders and lots of addiction is from people who are actively engaging in those behaviors, whether they are process addictions, which is Hazelden's profitable term, or they are addictions to substances exterior to the body. So biologically, am I predisposed to become addicted to things? I don't know. Some things are addictive. Cigarettes are addictive. Was I disposed to become addicted to it? Or is it fucking addictive, right? I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't matter because I'm still smoking. Like, so who cares? Am I still addicted to heroin? No. Is it addictive? Yes, highly, to almost anyone, in the same way opiates are, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You know, if you look at the 12-step model of like, you're a selfish alcoholic, and you put that on people who were given opiates for a knee surgery that they got hooked on, Were they a selfish alcoholic, or did an incredibly high profit industry profit on giving them medication that they then got hooked on and now they can profit on, and then they die of a fentanyl overdose by accident because they eventually run out of money to buy the opiates and they wind up on heroin, and then they wind up on loaded heroin and they die of fentanyl. And I'm like, so all of this is happening. The question is, like, is my mental health journey, it cannot be separated from the profit industry of mental health care. It can't be separated. So at this point, if I no longer have bipolar or never did, for sure I have enough medical trauma to never go back to a doctor. Because as comforting as I find institutions, I can no longer be in a medical clinic, and this is all Foucault, I can no longer be in a medical clinic without having a panic attack, and I don't otherwise have panic attacks. But if you get me near a blood pressure cuff, I will start to hyperventilate and cry. And I mean not to. Like every time I go back, I'm like, that was just silliness. I don't know, I had too much coffee. But I cannot be in a medical clinic now without being like, they're going to fucking keep me. They're going to keep me for no reason, right? And so that is trauma, right? Like that lives in the body in ways I don't understand, but neither does anybody else. Do I have PTSD? Probably. Do I have bipolar? Probably not. What is bipolar? There's such a constellation of other traits in the people they call bipolar, right? Like, do some of those people have true manic episodes? Yes. Do some of those people have what we're calling hypomanic episodes? Yes. Do people without bipolar have periods of great focus and intensity? Yes. Do we pathologize them? No. So what is the purpose? And so that's the thing for me is, if we're going to take a post hoc ergo propter hoc approach, what is useful to someone about the name or the framework? If it's useful, far be it from me to say you can't have it. At what point, though, did it stop being useful to me and become debilitating? And it was when I started conflating who I am with the illness, right? I am this way because I am bipolar. Well, or am I just that way? And bipolar gives me a way of reductively understanding it. What if life is just so overwhelmingly amorphous that some days I'm high and low, that some days I cry, that some days I'm in a rage? What if, in fact, the world has collapsed and that's upsetting to me? What if everybody else should be a little more upset by it? What if other people are able to narrow their consciousness to focus in ways that I can't? What if other people don't find music so powerful that they just sob? I don't do that as much anymore. But then also, when I hit menopause, suddenly I wasn't nearly as high and low. And I'm like, so was the problem that I have ovaries? Was that the pathology? Maybe if we understood anything about hormones, we'd know why so many smart women are bipolar a couple of times a year, 12 roughly. I'm just wondering. So like the problem with it is that, you know, the cycles are diurnal, the cycles are monthly, the cycles are yearly. All of that is so much more physiologically amorphous than an organic disease of the brain. I love the idea of it's just like diabetes, but it is not just like diabetes. It's not at all like diabetes. Not at all. Even diabetes is not just like diabetes. You know what I mean? Like none of these derivative kind of reductive frameworks of the body or the mind fit, really, once you're past. But if they serve, why not? Like bipolar as a concept was very helpful to me for a really long time. Like it was really helpful. And then it wasn't. So that's more my journey than probably what you asked. But writing about it is, you know, useful.
You look delighted by what you just heard.
I feel delighted. I feel totally delighted.
I've been trying to tell her this. You know, like she's a couple times framed it.
I've also been saying this.
She's framed it a couple times like you're with a mentally ill woman. I'm like, no, I'm not. If anything, society is much more mentally ill than. And one of the things I'm trying to do in the movie is to show that we are in a mania about the AI,
Yes.
and we're having a manic episode.
Yes.
And the culture is, if anything, Dulcinea is one of the more sane and sensitive and tuned in people I've ever met. And this this framework again, like you said, if it's useful, great.
Right.
If like, do you know James Hillman was?
Sure. Yeah.
So I he was a good friend of my dad's. I got to hang out with him a lot in Italy. And he said, your soul is like a garden or a room that you live in. And if you illuminate every corner, it becomes uninhabitable. Yes. But if you're bumping into the furniture all the time, then you might want to light it up and see. So you've got to, I think if insofar as the diagnosis is helpful and it allows you to, level certain things, whether it's hormones or brain chemistry in ways that you find useful, great. I'm not against that, but I think pathologizing is a dangerous route.
I think my there's so much to say. I think my intellectual brain is just light years ahead of my emotional brain. And so when I first received a diagnosis and my first sort of the months of processing are so in line with everything that you've said, and it rings true in my body so deeply, and yet there's this emotional journey that is not it's not in sync with the intellectual journey. And it's like I've read so much, like Deleuze and Guattari, like so much about mental health and the philosophy of mental health and its relationship to capitalism, and that's so in my body and in my history. And yet when it happened to me in this very traditional way of like capital P psychiatry, the emotional response and also everybody else's emotional response in my life was like out of sync with if I was just sitting alone in a room, like without the world, I would have like a different experience. And then being in contact with the world and the people around me and life just kind of rendered this like other experience where, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how it's almost like I'm following a script. I'm like following the mental health script. And it's, and I can't, there's something that I have to kind of just do it for a bit for some reason that like I wish I could not do it, but I feel like I am following this script because one, that's expected of me, and also maybe why not? Like there's part of me that's like, there's at one point, I think you have this on tape somewhere, of me being like, okay, like you call me crazy, like I'll be crazy. And exactly, watch this, and like I'm gonna follow the script. Yeah, I'm gonna go up and then I'm gonna go down, like so low. I'm gonna go so low. And I can think about all of that, and then sometimes I'm just in it. And like there's something about being inside of it that I can't snap out of it, but I really think I really saw this clarity as you were speaking of like, one day I'm not going to be following the script. Like, and that's really exciting to me because I'm not someone who follows scripts. Like I'm really not. And for some reason, I think I've just fallen into the script, and I find that the word and the diagnosis, was like I experienced some sort of break that I'm still working through. Whereas like previously I had ups and downs and I was fine. Right. And I just didn't have a word for it. Yeah. But I had my mechanism of moving through it. And then all of a sudden there was this word and I was like, I don't know how to be anymore. And it was really, I'm still figuring it out, but it's so refreshing to hear your perspective. I love that. It's like a wash of fresh air because not many people have that perspective. It's crazy. Like people are like, no, it is like diabetes. Like you have to take a medicine for it. And it's like, I feel like maybe that's true for some people. It's maybe not true for all of the people And I do believe the brain is very complicated and we do not understand it, as all of the neuroscientists like
this weekend
scream
said,
at us.
literally scream at us. We had a bunch of intoxicated neuroscientists.
Oh my God, I love
this
that.
weekend.
I want to see a
and
bunch
one
of
of them was like,
intoxicated neuroscientists.
one of them,
Put them in the
I
trailer with
wished
the
I had a
philosophers,
camera
please.
out because he was so wasted. And he was like, I can tell he's a 10-year professor. He's like, we have no idea even the slightest how to make even a cell, let alone a brain. He's like, and these people studying mice are so arrogant because a mouse is 100 billion times too complicated for us to understand.
Yes.
He said we should be studying worms.
Yes, absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true. And so the hubris to me of leaping from, we know a little bit about patterns of behavior, to we understand the brain disease that is bipolar, that is schizophrenia, that is this, that is that, the other thing. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And that doesn't make it invaluable. It makes it misrepresented, right? Therapy is fucking useful. Therapy is useful. Therapy helps people. Therapy helps me. Medications help with psychosis, specifically. The efficacy of the other meds is so fucking pathetic. Doesn't mean it doesn't help the 33% of the people that it helps. But can you imagine marketing a heart disease medication that was working for a third of the people you tested it on, all of whom were the same middle-aged white boy? Like, I'm sorry, you would never do that. But somebody has to make money. We all got to serve somebody, right? And so that becomes the question of what you said. A couple things you said really struck me. First was, I had my way of moving through it before. You will again have a way of moving through it. It will just, the best writing advice ever given was Kurt Vonnegut, who said, look, whatever works, works. That's his whole writing advice. That's it. Like, I've been teaching college level and graduate school writing all this time, and that still is better than anything I've ever taught. Whatever works, works. Same with the mind, right? Like, you manage it to the best of your ability with the tools that you have. Some people have tools we don't have. Other people's have, I have tools somebody else doesn't have, right? One of them is having gone through an incredibly long, arduous time of being locked in the psychiatric industrial complex on so many fucking medications. They took away my capacity, not just to write, but to see straight, because they were so concerned about my health and happiness. And I'm like, ultimately, the only people who are uncomfortable with me being on one medication that's basically for nightmares are the psychiatrists who are no longer making a profit on the 13 medications they gave me. And I'm sorry they're sad about that, but I'm feeling quite good. And I don't mean all the time. I don't mean good happy. I mean good like myself, which is to say I have a way of moving through it. Whatever it is, right? Like, the highs are high enough, the lows are low enough. They are very much within what feels to me like an acceptable range. Like, I have a wider emotional range than some people. I also have more IQ points, sorry. But I do, so do you. You're gonna have a wider range because you're perceiving up here and down here in a way not everybody is. And you're so stricken with fucking language that you're gonna be needing to, like, translate. Like you said in your poetry is hard to translate. Experience is hard to translate, right? And when you're trying to put it into language and image all the time, which you can't help because that's how your brain works, it's uncomfortable. There's a bigger range. Other people will not always like that range. They will be comforted by the idea if we could just put her in this itty bitty box and call her bipolar, we will feel better. Too bad. They can go to therapy. If they are suffering because you exist and are smart, they can go to therapy for that. But I mean, until that time, unless you are suffering or harming yourself or anyone else, your ability to move through it is the only actual thing that matters, right? Like, you can't harm people while you're moving through it. Like, if other people are like, I find you really uncomfortable, and they're in your house, say, go home. Then, like, I'm comfortable, go home. Because nobody's in my fucking camper with me telling me, wow, you're really loud in your own camper. Like, if they say that, I'm like, you motherfucker need to go. That doesn't make me normal. It doesn't make me, but it doesn't make me ill. You know what I mean? Being who I am, I'm able to do my work. I'm able to feed myself. I take very good care of myself. I take very good care of people I love. And there's a lot of them. Like, I'm not hitting anyone. I'm not, the way the Hillman garden metaphor strikes me. I always talk about the one call it emotional or mental feature I have that does give me persistent distress. I call it my pet tiger. I have a pet tiger who comes in and like just lies down. It's my anger, right? And that has much more to do with having been deprived of 30 years of my life than it does with my brain or my organic self, right? It comes from having been literally kidnapped from my fucking life and locked up and given medications and told there was something wrong with me. And I eventually was like, what if there's something wrong with you? Well, that by definition means I'm crazy, right? If I say all these nice white men in suits are crazy. But the fact of it is, we are in yellow wallpaper all over again. Like we're in the fucking yellow wallpaper where the medical gaslighting is so profound and so extreme and so comforting and so reassuring, and we just want the best for you. Why do they only want the best for smart girls? Why are they not after people who do not, in fact, have enough care for real mental health issues like food scarcity, like they can't pay their light bill? Like, why are they not concerned about the mental health of people living in the inner city who don't have enough food? Why aren't they going out to help those people if they're so fucking concerned? If what they're really concerned about is people's wellness, they need to get the fuck out of their private pay offices and go help people. But that's not what's happening. They're medicating people who have the money to pay them for a word.
Yeah. True.
You're letting a tiger out of a cage.
But the tiger doesn't run it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my tiger doesn't get to run my life. I'm aware of it. And when it's out, I'm like, today is not the day to go on a date. You know what I mean? Like, you know, that's not today. It's a different day. Like, I heard you talking brilliantly about the way anger rises when you were talking to men, about gender, about being in the world. And you said, I can hear it. It's happening now. And I'm like, that's the tiger. It gets to live here. Like, to squelch the tiger's power really is going to be a problem for us politically. If you and I both tell our tiger it can't come, the work isn't going to fucking get done. You know what I'm saying? So, like, detoothing the tiger isn't the strategy if what we want is artistic innovation, if what we want is global change, if what we want is gender equity, if what we want is a fucking future on this planet. We can't detooth it. We do need to manage it, right? Like, we have to have that way of working through it, whatever it is. Whatever it is. And whatever works, frankly. You know?
And so we showed you the first 17 minutes of the movie we're working on.
So fucking brilliant. So brilliant.
What do you
Well, I gotta say, the editing is top notch. I mean that. Like, I actually really.
We both edit.
Like, I know.
That's definitely we get. That's a
credit.
wonderful collaboration.
That's a brilliant
I'm loving
thing.
that.
Like, collaborating on editing is no joke. Like, I mean, that is the post-production collaboration process is so much more, tends to be like, I can't co-edit a piece of writing with someone. Like, I can get their feedback, but then I got to go do the work. Like, co-editing, that's collaboration. Like, I've never.
We'll see. It's our first attempt at this.
Well, the first 17 minutes are fucking brilliant. And so, one of the things.
What do they bring up for you? Like, I'm just curious, having your background, that I specifically wanted to show it to you. I haven't shown it to anyone else yet.
Yeah.
In its current form. I've shown earlier cuts to a couple of people, but can I just get your some broad reactions, including any advice you might have, any just thoughts? I'm going to put you in the movie if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Fine. I mean, it's all happening all the time, right? Like, this is the art of it, is the happening. And so I think one of the things that really struck me was the narrative precision of the weaving of the stories. When you were talking about the mechanism, and when you see the AI come in, you're like, holy shit, this is what's happening here. And so the text overlays, the text and face overlays, the text image overlays. To me, the weaving is so precise. And sustaining that throughout the whole film will be unbelievable. Like, no one will leave the theater. They'll just sit there for a while. Because that's how I did when I got back here last night. I was like, I just sat and thought about it for a really long time. The use of the red overlay is incredible. I'm just like off the top of my head. In terms of examining, to me, it's such a brilliant reflection on the partiality of the idea of mental health. The incredible limitations also of AI. Right? Like, you can ask it a question, you can ask it a prompt, and what keeps energetically popping out of the screen when you're watching those 17 minutes is, this will defy your efforts to film it. It'll defy your efforts to ask ChatGPT a question. It'll defy your efforts to create layer and image and text. And it will defy this because the humanity of the character in question is so profound and so much larger than the frame, than the text, than any of it working together. And that's what any great work of art can do, is show us, look, this is my best gesture at capturing what I saw. This is all I got. I only have language or image. Like, sometimes both.
And music.
Really,
music,
right. I mean, but I've only got these couple of, like, these are my, I only have these 5 senses that I can really articulate. Then I have this 6th, which is super woo-woo, and I don't even know what to do with it half the time. So, like, but the popping, what keeps it vibrating, pulsating, is Dulcinea keeps popping up and being like, fuck your GPT. And I'm like, yep, here we go. This is our whole issue right now. She will keep being bigger than your fucking frame, dude. She'll keep being bigger than your frame. And good luck with everything. But I think, but that is what makes it so powerful. And that's what keeps the decoding of it. There's this wonderful absurdity to relationship, to people, and our efforts to be like, look, I have a new little box, into which I can pack my big old fucking consciousness. It will never work, but that's what keeps it vibrating, right? Like the consciousness popping at the seams of it, and Dulcinea is popping at the seams of this whole image, but so are you. Like, and the love of it is also bursting through it, is this effort to both capture and defy capture. And that, I feel like, speaks to the whole nature of the collaboration, whatever the nature of the collaboration is, whether it is emotional or creative or physical, it doesn't matter. It's the nature of the collaboration that's iterations bigger than the form. So our best efforts, like at art, are distillations, not capture. Like think about like boiling down a sauce. You're reducing it to this high impact.
I use this exact metaphor with
right.
it. And then the only idea that stayed with me from taking an aesthetics class in philosophy at Berkeley 25 years ago was that one of the things that defines great art is the struggle with the medium. That if you don't have that, you get mannerism. Like someone who knows exactly how to paint with the biggest precision is never going to be interesting because they don't have that struggle with the medium, trying to do something impossible. So that's why I like the way you brought my attention back to that concept.
And that feels like that's why this is so alive, is so sort of like, it is the nature, it is Mary Shelley's monster of like, whoops, I just made something bigger than myself, but it still is only one expression of this thing. And in that expression, like I struggle with language. I feel like language is the one thing I've got in this life. But what that means is that its endless possibilities reveal themselves to me all the time, which is like, yes, have I mastered language? Yes, which means it's also mastered me. It's a life work now. Now I'm fucked. Like now I can't get out of sentences. Now I'm stuck with sentences, trying to make new ones. Because think of all the combinations. When you bring in another artist, when you bring in another subject, when you're collaborating about anything at all, you have it's expanding exponentially rather than geometrically at that point. Like you're going other way around. You're expanding geometric, you're going in all directions at that point and creating something that is so much larger. And yet there's more that can go wrong in a work, right? But that's also true of a relationship. There's more that can go wrong when there's two of you. You know what I mean? Like, but there's also possibilities that do not exist when there's one of you. There's lots of possibilities that do not exist when there's one of you. And that's very true in a work of art as well. So, impressions.
Yay! Yeah. I'm excited. Okay, well, is there anything else that you want to talk about before I turn this off?
Later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any closing words?
No, I love it. I fucking love it.
Yeah. And I also love being able to work in these multiple media at the same time because I have as a documentary filmmaker, I hate that 99% of what you do ends up on the cutting room floor. Yes. So I love that the podcast can coexist.
Yes.
That you can just throw stuff out there, which also becomes like a really long trailer for the movie, I'm realizing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like having done the hour-and-a-half conversation with you where someone's like, you got to make a movie. I'm like, don't worry, we are doing that too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you both for bearing little tiny parts of your souls that can never be contained inside this little frame. But bursting outside of it at the same time. More to come.
Indeed.